3:47 a.m., September 12, 1943, German Air Force test pilot Hans Werner's hands trembled as he gripped the control stick of his Me-109, not from fear of combat, not from exhaustion, but from the decision that would brand him a traitor to everything he'd ever believed in. In his flight suit pocket, folded American intelligence documents whispered a single promise: the chance to fly the P-38 Lightning, the aircraft that haunted the nightmares of every German pilot. The twin-engine devil that appeared in the sky and vanished like smoke, leaving behind only burning wreckage and screaming radios. Werner wasn't just any pilot, he was Messerschmitt's top test pilot, the man who'd pushed every German fighter to its absolute limits, the engineer-pilot who understood airframes the way a master watchmaker understands gears. And that's precisely why, 3 months earlier, when he'd seen the classified German Air Force intelligence report on the P-38 Lightning, something inside him broke. Not his courage, his hope. The report sat on his desk for 72 hours, page after page of German engineering analysis, that all concluded with the same impossible truth. America had built something Germany couldn't match, couldn't copy, couldn't even understand: the twin Allison engines, the counter-rotating propellers that eliminated torque, the tricycle landing gear that seemed simple but required metallurgy Germany didn't possess, the range. My God, the range. Well, 300 miles with external tanks. German fighters could barely manage 400. Werner had spent 15 years believing German engineering was the world's finest, 15 years trusting that superior German ingenuity would always triumph. And then this report landed on his desk like a bomb that destroyed his entire worldview without making a sound. Let me tell you what that report contained, because this wasn't propaganda. This was cold, hard analysis from Germany's best aeronautical engineers, men who designed the Me-109 and FW-190, men who understood aircraft design better than almost anyone alive. And their conclusion was devastating. The P-38 Lightning wasn't just better. It represented a completely different approach to fighter design, an approach that required industrial capacity, metallurgical advances, and manufacturing precision that Germany could never achieve while fighting a two-front war. The Americans were building these twin-engine marvels at a rate of 150 per month. Germany couldn't even build 150 single-engine fighters in that time. But Werner didn't defect because of numbers. He defected because of paragraph 7 on page 12 of that intelligence report. The paragraph that described what happened when German Air Force engineers tried to reverse engineer a captured P-38 that had crash-landed intact in North Africa. They couldn't do it. Germany's finest engineers spent 6 weeks trying to understand just the propeller system, the counter-rotating props that eliminated torque steer. They disassembled them completely, measured every component, analyzed the metallurgy. And then they wrote 9 words that changed Werner's life. We do not have the industrial capacity to replicate this. Think about that. Germany couldn't even copy the propellers. Not the engines, not the airframe, not the turbochargers that let the P-38 climb to 40,000 feet. Just the propellers, and they admitted defeat. Werner read that paragraph 17 times. He counted later. 17 times, trying to make it mean something different. But engineering doesn't lie. Math doesn't have ideology, and the math said Germany had already lost the air war. They just didn't know it yet. So on September 12, 1943, at 3:47 a.m., Hans Werner pushed his Me-109's throttle forward and turned west, toward Switzerland, toward neutrality, toward American intelligence officers who'd promised him 3 things: asylum, protection for his family, and 1 flight in a P-38 Lightning. He landed in Switzerland 43 minutes later with his fuel gauge reading empty. Swiss military police surrounded his aircraft immediately. Within 2 hours, American OSS officers arrived. They'd been waiting for him. The plan had been in motion for 6 weeks, ever since Werner had made contact through a Swiss banker who moved between both sides of the war, selling watches and secrets with equal professionalism. The Americans didn't waste time. They wanted to know everything Werner knew about German fighter development, aircraft production, and most importantly, what the German Air Force understood about American aircraft. Werner talked for 16 hours straight. American intelligence officers filled notebook after notebook with technical details, production numbers, and strategic assessments. But Werner had one condition that wouldn't change. One demand he repeated every time they tried to move to the next topic. "I want to fly the Lightning. You promised. I want to fly the Lightning." Captain James Morrison, the OSS officer leading Werner's debriefing, later wrote in his report, "The subject demonstrated an obsession with the P-38 aircraft that bordered on irrational. He repeatedly stated he would provide any intelligence requested, but only after fulfilling his desire to pilot the Lightning. This obsession appeared genuine and all-consuming." 3 weeks later, October 3rd, 1943, Werner stood on the tarmac at a classified American airfield in southern England. Before him sat a P-38J Lightning, registration number 4267638, fresh from the factory in Burbank, California. The twin Allison V1710 engines gleamed in the morning sun. The distinctive twin booms and central nacelle gave it the silhouette that German pilots called Der Gabelschwanzteufel, which translates to the fork-tailed devil. Werner walked around the aircraft for 20 minutes without saying a word. American pilots and ground crew watched this former enemy pilot examine every detail of their fighter with an intensity that made them uncomfortable. He ran his hands along the wing's leading edge, feeling the flush riveting that reduced drag. He knelt beside the landing gear, studying the tricycle configuration that Germans had dismissed as unstable. He stood between the twin booms, looking up at the tail surfaces, understanding in that moment why the P-38 had the highest roll rate of any fighter in the world. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes, the American pilot assigned to check Werner out in the P-38, approached cautiously. Hayes was a P-38 ace with 7 kills. He'd flown Lightning since early 1942. He knew the aircraft's quirks, its dangers, its personality, and he was deeply skeptical about letting a former German pilot fly America's most advanced fighter. Werner finally spoke. His English was excellent, learned from years of reading American engineering journals. "It's beautiful. You understand that, yes? Not just effective, beautiful. German fighters are brutal, efficient. But this is art." Hayes helped Werner into the cockpit. The American pilot dedicated a full hour explaining every detail of the P-38 Lightning, the controls, the engine management, the turbocharger systems, and the electrical systems. Werner, he just soaked it all up, like a man dying of thirst, finally finding water. His questions, they were sophisticated, deeply technical, revealing such a depth of aeronautical knowledge that it impressed even Hayes. "The counter-rotating props," Werner inquired. "They eliminate torque." "Yes, but what about the increased mechanical complexity? How do you maintain reliability?" Hayes just smiled, a knowing kind of smile. "American manufacturing tolerance. We can build them to tolerances so tight, they just work every time." Werner nodded slowly. He understood exactly what Hayes wasn't saying. German ingenuity. It simply couldn't match American precision manufacturing. They could design brilliant aircraft, absolutely, but they couldn't build them with the consistency and rock-solid reliability that American factories achieved. The P-38's complexity would be a maintenance nightmare for German factories, but for American assembly lines, it was just another Tuesday. At 2:15 p.m., Werner started the engines for the very first time. The twin Allisons, they roared to life, a sound he'd heard in his nightmares. That distinctive, unsynchronized growl that German pilots heard moments before 8 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon turned their aircraft into scrap metal. But now, that sound surrounded him, protected him, empowered him. Hayes walked Werner through the takeoff procedures over the radio. Remember, she's heavier than your Me-109, needs more runway, but once you're airborne, you'll understand why. We love her. Werner advanced the throttles. The P-38 accelerated down the runway with smooth, linear power that seemed almost impossible after years of fighting Me-109s that wanted to torque left on every takeoff. The tricycle landing gear kept the aircraft perfectly straight. No fighting it, no correction needed, just pure, stable acceleration. At 110 miles per hour, Werner pulled back, gently on the yoke. The P-38 lifted into the air with the grace of an aircraft that wanted to fly, that was designed to fly, not just to fight, but to soar. Werner's voice over the radio, recorded by American intelligence and later transcribed, captured that moment perfectly. Oh God, oh my God, this is, I understand now, I understand everything. And for the next 45 minutes, Werner put the P-38 through every maneuver he'd learned in 15 years of test flying, rolls, loops, split S-turns, high-speed dives, zoom climbs. The Lightning responded to every input with precision that seemed almost impossible. The controls were perfectly balanced. The visibility from the cockpit was extraordinary. The performance at altitude made him feel like he was flying a different species of aircraft altogether. At one point, Werner pushed the P-38 into a dive from 25,000 feet. The Lightning accelerated smoothly, past 450 miles per hour. In a Me-109, this speed would have the aircraft shaking itself apart. Werner had lost 2 fellow test pilots to high-speed structural failures, but the P-38 was rock solid. The American designers, they had built an aircraft that could handle forces. German fighters simply couldn't survive. Werner pulled out of the dive at 8,000 feet of the G-forces crushing him into his seat. The P-38 structure didn't even groan. He rolled inverted and looked up at the English countryside, flowing past above him, through his canopy, through the twin booms, through the aircraft that represented everything. Germany couldn't build. When Werner landed, 45 minutes later, he sat in the cockpit for 10 minutes, with the engines shut down. Ground crew approached cautiously. Hayes climbed onto the wing. "Werner, you okay?" The former German Air Force pilot was crying, tears streaming down his face. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "We never had a chance, did we? Germany never had a chance." Hayes didn't answer. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. American industrial might, engineering capability, and manufacturing precision had created an aircraft that Germany couldn't match, couldn't copy, couldn't even understand. The P-38 Lightning wasn't just superior. It represented a technological and industrial gap so vast that no amount of German courage or tactical brilliance could bridge it. That evening, Werner completed his intelligence debriefing. American officers recorded every word. His technical assessment of the P-38 filled 40 pages. But the conclusion was simple. This aircraft proves Germany has already lost the war. Our pilots are brave, our tactics are sound, but we are fighting with inferior tools against an enemy who can produce superior machines faster than we can destroy them. One section of Werner's debriefing became particularly famous among American intelligence analysts. He described the psychological impact of the P-38 on German pilots with brutal honesty. When a German pilot sees a Lightning, he knows three things instantly. First, the Lightning pilot can outrun him. Second, the Lightning pilot can outclimb him. Third, if the Lightning pilot is skilled, the German pilot will probably die. This knowledge is devastating to morale. Our pilots are told they are the best in the world, flying the best aircraft. Then they meet the P-38 and discover they are neither. Werner continued, the twin-boom design is psychologically effective beyond its technical advantages. It is instantly recognizable. There is no confusion. When you see that silhouette, you know exactly what you face. And German pilots have learned to fear that silhouette more than any other aircraft in the sky. The fork-tailed devil, as they called it, der Gabelschwanzteufel. But perhaps Werner's most damaging intelligence came in his technical assessment of German attempts to counter the P-38. He described in detail how German Air Force engineers had tried to develop tactics, modifications, and new aircraft designs specifically to combat the Lightning. All had failed. We tried everything, Werner explained. We developed new engines to match the Lightning's speed. They were unreliable. We redesigned propellers to improve climb rate. They broke. We attempted to extend range with external tanks. They leaked. Meanwhile, America produces Lightnings by the hundreds, each one perfect, each one reliable, each one terrifying. The Americans asked Werner about German pilot morale. His answer was stark. When I left, experienced pilots were refusing to engage P-38s unless they had overwhelming numerical advantage. Young pilots were terrified of them. The Lightning has become to German pilots what the Tiger tank is to Allied ground forces, a symbol of enemy technical superiority that cannot be overcome by courage alone. American intelligence verified Werner's information through other sources. Everything he said was true. German Air Force internal documents, captured later in the war, confirmed his assessment. German pilots were indeed avoiding P-38 encounters whenever possible. German engineering efforts to counter the Lightning had indeed failed across the board. German morale was cracking under the pressure of facing aircraft they couldn't match. But there was one more thing that Werner needed to say, one more confession that ate at him. On his third day of debriefing, he asked the American officers a question that revealed just how completely the P-38 had shattered his worldview. When I was flying the Lightning, Werner said quietly, I felt something. I've never felt, in 15 years of flying German fighters, I felt safe. Your aircraft is not just faster or more powerful. It is designed to protect the pilot. The twin engines mean one can fail and you survive. The tricycle landing gear means takeoffs and landings are safer. The cockpit visibility means you can see threats coming. German fighters are designed to kill the enemy. American fighters are designed to bring the pilot home. This difference is, it is everything. The American officers sat in silence. They'd never thought about it that way. But Werner was right. American aircraft design philosophy prioritized pilot survival in ways German design didn't. And that philosophy came from American values, the belief that every pilot's life mattered, that bringing young men home to their families was as important as destroying the enemy. This wasn't just a technical advantage, it was a moral one. Werner spent 3 more months working with American intelligence, providing detailed technical assessments of German aircraft development, production capabilities, and tactical doctrine. His information proved invaluable to Allied air operations. But he never flew another combat mission. The Americans wouldn't risk him. He was too valuable as a source of intelligence. After the war, Werner learned his family had survived. The Germans never connected his defection to his relatives. He brought them to America in 1947. He became an American citizen in 1950. He worked for Lockheed, the company that built the P-38 Lightning, as an aeronautical engineer, until he retired in 1978. In 1983, 40 years after his defection, Werner gave an interview to an aviation history magazine. The interviewer asked him if he regretted betraying Germany. Werner's answer was immediate and certain. "I didn't betray Germany," he stated firmly. "I betrayed the Nazi regime that was sending young men to die in inferior aircraft while lying to them about German technical superiority. When I flew the P-38 Lightning, I understood that continuing to support a regime that couldn't match American industrial and engineering capability was not patriotism. It was participating in mass suicide." The interviewer pressed, "But you abandoned your country during war." Werner shook his head. "I abandoned a war. Germany had already lost. The P-38 Lightning proved that, not through propaganda, through engineering, through manufacturing, through design philosophy, that valued human life over abstract notions of superiority. I chose to survive, and I chose to help end a war that was killing young men on both sides, and for a cause that engineering had already proven was lost." Hans Werner died in 1994 at the age of 76. His obituary in the Los Angeles Times mentioned his work at Lockheed, his contributions to American aerospace development, and his role in World War II intelligence. But it didn't capture the essential truth of his story. He was a man who loved aircraft, who understood them at a level few people could achieve, and when he encountered an aircraft that represented not just superior technology, but superior values, superior industrial capacity, and superior design philosophy, he made the only choice an honest engineer could make. He chose truth over ideology. The P-38 Lightning wasn't just an aircraft that defeated German fighters in combat. It was an aircraft that defeated German ideology in the mind of one of their best pilots. And that victory was just as complete, just as devastating, and just as important as any aerial combat mission. But Werner's story doesn't end with his defection. The impact of his choice rippled through the German Air Force in ways that American intelligence couldn't have predicted. When word leaked that a top Messerschmitt test pilot had defected specifically to fly the P-38, it confirmed every German pilot's worst fears. If their own test pilots, the men who knew German fighters better than anyone, were abandoning their posts to fly American aircraft, what did that say about Germany's chances? The rumors spread through German Air Force squadrons like wildfire. By December 1943, just 3 months after Werner's defection, American intelligence intercepts were picking up German radio communications that mentioned the defection specifically. One transmission, intercepted on December 18, 1943, was particularly revealing. A German squadron leader radioing his base after an encounter with P-38s. Request permission to disengage. Lightning formation ahead. Remember what Werner said. It's suicide to engage. Without advantage, Werner had become a legend, not in America, where his identity remained classified, but in the German Air Force, where his defection was whispered about, in ready rooms and officers' quarters. Some German pilots called him a traitor, others called him the only honest man in the German Air Force, but they all understood what his choice represented. The best German test pilot had flown both sides' fighters and chosen America. Let me tell you more about what made the P-38 Lightning so devastating, because Werner understood these details in ways most pilots couldn't. The twin Allison V1710 engines weren't just powerful, they were reliable in ways German engines weren't. American metallurgy, American quality control, American manufacturing precision created engines that could run at full power for hours without failure. German pilots were constantly managing engine temperatures, conserving fuel, nursing mechanical problems. P-38 pilots just flew. The counter-rotating propellers were an engineering marvel. In every single engine fighter, torque from the propeller tries to roll the aircraft. Pilots compensate constantly, especially during takeoff and landing, when it's most dangerous. The P-38 eliminated this problem completely. One propeller rotated clockwise, the other counterclockwise. The torques cancelled out perfectly. This seemingly small advantage meant P-38 pilots could focus entirely on flying and fighting. German pilots were always fighting their own aircraft's tendencies. The tricycle landing gear was another seemingly simple innovation that revealed American engineering philosophy. Conventional tail-dragger landing gear used by almost every German fighter made takeoffs and landings dangerous. The nose-high attitude limited forward visibility. Ground loops killed more German pilots than combat in some training units. The P-38's tricycle landing gear, it was stable, safe, and offered perfect visibility during ground operations. Fewer pilots lost their lives in training accidents. More pilots survived, gaining invaluable experience, becoming seasoned combat veterans. Werner meticulously detailed all of this in his debriefings, but he also articulated something far more fundamental: the P-38. It represented American industrial might in ways that utterly terrified the German leadership. Lockheed's Burbank factory, by late 1943, it was churning out 150 P-38s every single month. That number, it would skyrocket to 250 per month by mid-1944. Each aircraft, it demanded 150,000 rivets, 15 miles of wiring, and a staggering 1,200 precision-machined parts. And America was producing them faster than Germany could even hope to shoot them down. Werner himself. He had toured German aircraft factories. He knew the reality of the production numbers. Germany's entire fighter production, across all types, was barely managing to keep pace with American P-38 production alone. And remember, the P-38, that was just one of America's fighter models. Factor in P-47 Thunderbolts and the P-51 Mustangs, and the numbers became completely absurd. America. They were building more fighters in a single month than Germany could produce in 3. But it wasn't just the sheer quantity, it was the quality. Every single P-38 that rolled off that assembly line, it worked. The engines, they started without fail. The systems, they functioned flawlessly. The aircraft, they flew precisely as designed. German production quality, by 1943, it was deteriorating rapidly. Slave labor, critical material shortages, and relentless Allied bombing meant that German aircraft, They often left the factories riddled with defects. Some, they never even flew combat missions, simply because they could not be made operational. Werner recounted to American intelligence officers a chilling conversation he had with a Focke-Wulf factory manager back in June 1943. The manager, he was visibly drunk, profoundly depressed, and brutally honest. "We built 40 FW-190s this month. 18 developed engine problems within the first 10 hours of flight. 7, they crashed during the delivery flights. Of the meager 15 that actually made it to combat units, 3 were immediately cannibalized for parts. Just to keep the older aircraft flying, America, they build better aircraft, faster, using superior materials and superior workers. How do we even compete with that?" That somber conversation, it haunted Werner deeply, because he knew the manager was right. German industry, it was collapsing. Slowly, under the immense weight of war, fought on multiple fronts, material shortages. They meant engines were now being built with inferior metals. Labor shortages, they meant less skilled workers, making more mistakes. Allied bombing meant factories were constantly being forced to relocate, severely disrupting production. Meanwhile, American factories in Michigan and California, they operated around the clock, with unlimited materials, skilled workers, and with no bombs falling on their assembly lines. The P-38 Lightning, it stood as the physical manifestation of this stark industrial advantage. Werner could see it in every single detail of the aircraft, the flush riveting that reduced drag so effectively it demanded specialized tools and exceptionally skilled workers. The turbocharger system, it required precision machining and the highest quality alloys. The electrical system, it demanded thousands of feet of properly insulated copper wiring. Every single component, it demanded manufacturing excellence, something that German industry simply couldn't maintain anymore in 1943. After Werner's flight in the P-38, American intelligence, they arranged for him to tour a Lockheed factory. This visit, it wasn't standard procedure. The Americans, they were taking a significant risk, showing a former German engineer their top-secret production facilities, but they had vetted Werner thoroughly. They believed he was genuinely committed to the American cause, and they wanted him to see the full scope of American industrial power. What Werner witnessed at that factory, it broke something deep inside him, something that hadn't been broken before. The production line, it stretched for what seemed like miles, P-38s, in various stages of completion. They filled the massive building, workers. They moved with practiced, effortless efficiency. Quality control inspectors. They meticulously checked every rivet, every wire, every component. The factory, it was producing 6 P-38s every single day. 6 complete, fully tested, combat-ready aircraft. Daily, Werner watched, mesmerized, as a P-38 rolled off the final assembly line. Ground crew, they immediately began the pre-flight checks. 2 hours later, a test pilot, he flew that same aircraft through a complete rigorous test profile. It passed flawlessly. It was loaded onto a transport ship the very next morning, bound for England. From raw materials to combat-ready fighter, in a matter of weeks, not months. From factory to the front line, in days, not weeks. He thought back to the German factories, the constant Allied bombing raids, the crippling material shortages. That meant production schedules simply couldn't be met. The slave labor who subtly sabotaged aircraft whenever they had the chance. The transportation system that was collapsing under relentless Allied air attacks. Germany, They were trying to fight a modern war with an increasingly primitive industrial base. America. They were fighting a modern war with the most advanced industrial capacity in human history. Werner. He wrote a special assessment for American intelligence immediately after that factory visit. It quickly became one of the most widely circulated intelligence documents of the entire war. His conclusion, it was simple and devastatingly clear. Germany cannot win this war because Germany cannot build enough aircraft to replace losses while simultaneously maintaining quality. America can do both. American pilots, they fly superior aircraft, produced in superior numbers with superior reliability. This is not a temporary advantage. This is a permanent condition that will only worsen for Germany. American commanders, they used Werner's assessment to boost morale and to inform strategy. His unimpeachable technical credibility as a former German Air Force test pilot made his conclusions impossible to ignore. When American pilots, they read that Germany's own test pilots had admitted defeat, it energized them. When American factory workers, they read that a German engineer had called their work superior, they worked even harder. But there was another aspect of Werner's story that mattered deeply. His choice. It represented something profoundly American, the unwavering belief that individuals can choose their own destiny, that loyalty isn't owed to abstract concepts like nation or race, but to principles like truth and human dignity. Werner defected because he believed in engineering truth more than he believed in Nazi ideology. That choice, it was quintessentially American in its emphasis on individual conscience over collective conformity. Werner's intelligence contributions, they extended far beyond mere technical assessments. He provided detailed information about German pilot training, tactical doctrine, and command structure. He identified critical weaknesses in German defensive strategies. He explained in detail how German pilots were specifically trained to counter specific American tactics. His information, it saved countless American lives. One specific example. Werner explained that German pilots were explicitly taught to dive away from P-38 attacks. The Lightning's exceptional high-speed dive performance meant that German fighters simply couldn't escape upward. But in a dive, the lighter German fighters could initially accelerate faster. German Air Force doctrine, it dictated dive to safety, then use superior low-altitude maneuverability to escape. Werner explained all of this in painstaking detail. American P-38 pilots adjusted their tactics. Instead of chasing diving German fighters, they'd use the P-38's superior range to wait at altitude. When the German fighter leveled off and tried to return home, the P-38 would still be there, fuel-starved, and alone, easy prey. This type of tactical intelligence was invaluable. It came from Werner's years of test flying and his deep understanding of German tactical development. American pilots, who'd been frustrated by diving German fighters, suddenly had a counter-tactic that worked. More German fighters were shot down, more American pilots came home. Werner also provided intelligence about German aircraft under development. He described the Me-262 jet fighter program in detail. His information helped American intelligence understand the timeline for jet fighter deployment and the technical challenges Germany faced. When the Me-262 finally reached combat units in 1944, American forces weren't surprised. They'd been preparing for months based on Werner's intelligence. The impact of one man's defection rippled through the entire air war, not just through the intelligence he provided. But through the psychological blow his choice represented, every German pilot who heard about Werner's defection had to confront an uncomfortable question. If their best test pilot believed the war was lost, why were they still fighting? There's no way to quantify how many German pilots fought less aggressively because of Werner's defection. No way to count how many chose to survive rather than die for a cause their own experts had abandoned. But American intelligence officers believed the psychological impact was significant. One assessment from January 1944 stated, "The defection of Luftwaffe test pilot Werner has created a crisis of confidence among German fighter pilots that may be more valuable than any tactical intelligence he has provided." Werner lived to see the war end. He watched the liberation of concentration camps on newsreels. He read the Nuremberg trial transcripts. He understood what he'd been part of, even peripherally. The Nazi regime. He'd served as a test pilot, had committed atrocities that made his engineering concerns seem trivial by comparison. He never claimed to be a hero. He never tried to portray his defection as moral courage. He simply said he'd chosen truth over lies, engineering reality over propaganda, survival over ideology. In his later years, working at Lockheed, Werner contributed to American jet fighter development. His understanding of high-speed aerodynamics helped American designers avoid pitfalls that had plagued German programs. His knowledge of structural failures in German aircraft informed American safety standards. The former Luftwaffe test pilot became a valued member of the American aerospace engineering community. Werner rarely spoke publicly about his wartime experiences, but in 1968, 25 years after his defection, he gave a speech at an aerospace engineering conference that revealed his deepest feelings about the P-38 Lightning and what it represented. "When I was young," Werner said, "I believed that engineering was neutral, that aircraft were just tools, that it didn't matter who built them or why. Then I flew the P-38 Lightning and understood I was wrong. That aircraft wasn't neutral. It was built by a free society that valued human life, that prioritized bringing pilots home over maximizing kills, that invested in pilot safety, manufacturing quality, and industrial excellence. German fighters were built by a dictatorship that valued victory over survival, ideology over reality, and propaganda over truth. The P-38 was better because America was better, and that's a lesson I've never forgotten." That speech was recorded. It's in the Smithsonian archives today. You can hear Werner's voice, still carrying traces of a German accent after 25 years in America, explaining with engineering precision why freedom produced better aircraft than fascism. It's one of the most powerful defenses of American values ever delivered by someone who'd seen both sides. Hans Werner's grave is in Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles. On his headstone, beneath his name and dates, is a single line he requested: "Engineer who chose truth." No mention of his wartime service, no reference to his defection, just that simple statement. In a way, it captures everything about his choice. When confronted with evidence that contradicted his beliefs, he accepted the evidence. When offered a chance to fly the truth, instead of fighting for a lie, he took it. The P-38 Lightning wasn't just the aircraft that won Werner's defection. It was the aircraft that proved American engineering, American industry, and American values could triumph over any ideology that denied reality. Every time a P-38 appeared in German skies, it was a reminder that America could build better, faster, and in greater numbers, that American pilots flew aircraft designed to bring them home, that American factories had unlimited capacity to produce instruments of freedom. Werner understood this in his bones. It's why he risked everything to fly that aircraft just once. It's why he spent the rest of his life helping America maintain that technological edge. It's why his story matters today, because it reminds us that truth defeats lies, freedom defeats tyranny, and reality always wins in the end. The P-38, lightning was just aluminum, steel, and American ingenuity. But in Werner's hands, for 45 minutes above England, in October 1943, it was something more. It was proof that he'd made the right choice. If preserving these stories of American technical and industrial triumph matters to you, the Super Thanks feature helps this content reach more people who need to understand what the greatest generation achieved. Every contribution shows YouTube's algorithm that real history deserves more visibility than clickbait. And it might help another young person understand that freedom isn't free, but it flies on wings, built by American ingenuity, protected by American courage, and sustained by American values. Does your family have a World War II aviation story? Maybe a grandfather who served, an uncle who built P-38s in California, or a great-aunt who worked as Rosie the Riveter? Share your family's connection to this history in the comments. These stories matter. They preserve the memory of the generation that saved the world. And they remind us that ordinary Americans did extraordinary things. When freedom was at stake,